Okay, today's Monday, March 6, 2017, the first day of the third trimester. And we're going to start our third trimester by learning about lesson 4.17, module 4, lesson 17. And your learning goal today is to be able to relate decimal multiplication and fraction multiplication. So you have to be able to go back and forth between fractions and decimals. If you forgot how to multiply decimals, you need to review it. This was in Module 2 or Module 3, I forget. But you're going to go back and take a look, okay? Do we need to line up the decimal point when we do decimal multiplication? No, because we're getting rid of them. We're thinking about how we can multiply the numbers by multiples of 10 to get rid of the decimals, to do whole number multiplication, and then we adjust it back by dividing. Okay, remember, give me a thumbs up if you remember learning this. Now, let's write down a decimal multiplication equation. 0.1 times 4. Go ahead and write that in the decimal column. What does this tell me? If I have 4 copies of 1/10, how many tenths do I have? 4 tenths. So how do I write that as a decimal? Okay. Now, could I write this same multiplication sentence as a fraction? How do I write 0.1 as a fraction?
1/10.
1/10 times 4. Does that equal 4 over 10?
Yeah.
Does that equal 2/5? So are these two sentences equivalent? Just one is in decimal form and one is in fraction form. Good, go ahead and write that down. Let's try this next one. 0.1 times 2. Using what we know about multiplying decimals, if I have 2 copies of 0.1, what do I have? 0.2, good. Now let's write that in fraction form. How do I write 0.1 in fraction form? 1/10, good, times 2. Does that equal 2 over 10? Which equals 1/5? Yeah, okay. Let's try this one. 0.01 times 6. I have 6 copies of 1/100th. So how many hundredths do I have? 6 hundredths. So how do I write that in decimal form? 0.06, good. Now, let's write that using fractions. If I have 0.01, how do I write that as a fraction?
100.
1 over 100. And then how many copies of it am I making?
6.
6. Does that equal 6 over 100?
Yeah.
Now how can I simplify that?
You can make it 3/50.
3/50. Good. So using this chart, we can see how we can write the same multiplication sentence as a decimal and as a fraction. Here we have a multiplication sentence, 0.1 times 0.1. Go ahead and write that down. Is that in decimal form or fraction form? Decimal form. Okay, so let's change it to fraction form. How can I write the first factor, 0.1, as a fraction? Everyone?
1/10.
1/10. What about the second one? 1/10. So here we have 1/10 times 1/10. Do we know how to do that? Of course. We can multiply the numerators, which is 1 times 1, over the denominators, which is 10 times 10. So that equals what? 1. And then what's 10 times 10? 1/100th. How do I write that as a decimal?
0.0.
Okay, so far we've written it as a decimal and as fraction multiplication. Let's also learn how to model it, okay? How can I write 1/10 times 1/10 as a number sentence? I mean, as a words. Could it be 1/10 of 1/10?
Yes.
Because we know that the word of is the same as the multiplication symbol, right? So if I have a rectangular fraction model, and you can see that this is 10 squares by 10 squares. Go ahead and draw yourself a square that's 10 squares by 10 squares. I'm going to label it as what? 1. This is just like the rectangular fraction models we did before. Now, do I have my whole 1 to begin with? No, I just have 1/10. So I'm going to color in 1/10, and I'm going to label it what? 1/10. Do you guys agree that I've colored in 1/10 of my entire box? Yeah. But do I want that entire 10th? No, I only want 1/10 of that. So I'm going to divide that. Do you see how it's been divided into 10 equal sections this way too? And I only want 1/10 of that. And I'm going to color that part in. I'm going to label it 1/10. Do you guys see how this is just the same as what we did before? So if I have 1/10 of 1/10, how many boxes are colored in with 2 different colors? 1. Out of a total of what? How many squares?
100.
So is that 1/100th? So we can see this multiplication sentence expressed with decimals, fractions, and with an area model. Okay, take a moment right now to make sure your area model is colored in. This time we're going to mix it up. We're going to do the fraction model first. Now, before we do that though, here we have 1.2 times 0.1. Is that the same thing as 0.1 times 1.2? What property says I can I can switch the factors around? Reagan?
Commutative.
The commutative property of
Multiplication.
You got it. 1.2 times 0.1 is equivalent to 0.1 times 1.2, yes? Okay, let's write this as something of something. It's going to be 0.1 written as a fraction is 1/10 of what? What is this? 1.2. How do I write that as a fraction? You got it. 1 2/10. So if I'm trying to find 1/10 of 1 2/10, do I color in 1/10 first or 1 2/10? Or sorry, 1 2/10 first. You got it. So go ahead and draw yourself. Do we need 1 10 by 10 box or do we need 2 10 by 10 boxes? 2. Go ahead and draw yourself 2 10 by 10 boxes. And then we're going to color in a whole one, right? Because it's 1. We have a hole here. And how many tenths? 2 tenths. Okay, so you're going to color in up to the 2 tenths. And of course we need to label it by going like this. This is 1 2/10. Now, how many of those 1 2/10 do we want? We want 1/10 of it. So you're going to look for one row all the way across, and you're going to color in. Okay, very good. And then, of course, we're going to label that. That's 1/10 of the 1 2/10. How many little sections are colored in with 2 colors? How many? 12. Okay, so it's 12. And then there's 100 in each box, so it's 12 hundredths. Can we simplify that? That's the same as 6/50ths, which is the same as 3/25ths. So our answer should be 3/25ths. Let's do some fraction. Let's write it as a fraction to see if that's the case. How do I write 0.1 as a fraction? 1/10. And then we know it's times 1 2/10. In order to do fraction multiplication, we need to write this as an improper fraction. How do I write 1 2/10 as an improper fraction? 12/10. Good. So this is 1/10 times 12/10. Okay. Can we do fraction multiplication? This is the same as 12 over 100. If I stop there, does that help me write the answer as a decimal? What is the answer as a decimal? Very good. And if we're writing it as a fraction, can we further simplify this? It becomes eventually 3/25ths. Yes? Okay. So again, do we see how we can do decimal multiplication, fraction multiplication, and area model multiplication? Very good. Here we have 1/10 times 100th. What is that? 1/10 times 100th. Let's write it as a fraction first. It'd be 1/10 times 100th. 1 times 1 in the numerator is 1. And then 10 times 100 is 1,000. So my answer is 1/1000th. So how do I write that as a decimal? What's 1/1000th? 0.001. I want the 1 in the thousandth place. Very good. Okay, let's try this next one. 5/10 times 100th. So it's 5/10 times 1/100th. What do I have in my numerator? 5. What do I have in my denominator? 10 times 100, which is 1,000. So my answer is 5/1000ths. Can I write that as a decimal? How do I write that as a decimal? 0.005. Very good. Oh, let's try this last one. This is a little trickier. How do I write this as a fraction? 1 5/10. 1 5/10. Good. Times, what do I have here? 100. Okay. Now, can I multiply this, or do I need to change something to an improper fraction? Yeah. I need to change 1 5/10 into an improper fraction. What would that be? 15/10 times 1/100. So what's 1 times 15? 15. over 10 times 100 is? So what's my answer? 15 thousandths. How do I write that as a decimal over here? 0.015. I want my rightmost to be in the thousandths place. What do you notice that's similar about these two problems? Tara? They have the same numbers. They both have a 7 and a 2, don't they? But what's different about these two? Alina?
For the first equation, the 7 is a whole number, and for the second one, the 7 is a decimal.
So using what we know about numbers, how do you think these two answers will be the same? Itai?
I think 7 times 0 or 2/10 will be greater than 1 because it's a whole number multiplied by a decimal.
Ooh, okay. So you think that, first of all, 7 times 2/10 and 7/10 times 2/10. Which answer will be greater?
7 times 2/10.
Yeah, because we have bigger things versus bigger factors in the first example compared to the second example, yes? Okay, so let's use what we know about fraction multiplication. Let's write both of those as a fraction multiplication. So for this one, we would have 7 times what? 2/10. What about this one? I'd have 7/10 times 2/10. Let's go ahead and solve that. 7 times 2/10, that would be 7 times 2 over what? 10, which is equal to 14 over 10, which is equal to 1 and 4/10, which is equal to 1 and 2/5. Good. Okay. Now, what if I want to write 1 and 2/5 as a decimal? Would 1 and 2/5 help me, or would 1 and 4/10 be better? Good. So how would I write that as a decimal, everyone?
1.4.
1.4. Good. Now let's try this one. 7/10 times 2/10. What would I have in my numerator? 7 times 2. And then my denominator is 10 times 10. So then when I solve that, 7 times 2 is 14. 10 times 10 is? And can I simplify that? How would I simplify it? It'd be 7/50ths. Good. Okay. Now, which form helps me write it as a decimal? 7/50ths or 1400ths? Good. How can I write 1400ths as a decimal? So, were we right in that this answer was greater than this one? How much greater? How much greater is it, Anushka?
10 times greater.
10 times greater, because do we see how the decimal point here is in between? Whoa, that's a big decimal point. In between the 1 and the 4, whereas here it's before. So essentially, did the decimal point just shift one time that way? And when it shifts one place to the left, we know it gets 10 times smaller. Very good.